And we're back with a quick tutorial on Project Zomboid. Sleep. What's the best way to go about it in-game and how does it work? First, just don't sleep. That's the best way to do it, is not to sleep at all. Instead, coffee and tea. Drink a bunch of that at the start and that'll get you through the first few days without even having to sleep, assuming you don't get unlucky. However, understanding how sleep works would give you a better idea of how to exploit it slightly. First off, over here we've got fatigue. Normally you can look this up under the debug menu going into general debuggers, and you can find the fatigue level in here, but I find it much handier to just have it up here using this mod. Then we're just going to wait until the time ticks over to 0040, hit the sleep, and if you'll watch the fatigue bar here, it immediately starts to plummet. And notice it seems to plummet much faster earlier in your sleep cycle, and then it slows down as you go along. This is very standard, and we'll see how this is modified by some of the later traits we're going to tack on. And there we go. It is 7:40 in the morning. You always seem to wake up exactly to the hour after you went to bed. So if you go to sleep at 1:40, you're going to wake up at some number of 40. So you might wake up at 5:40, 6:40, 7:40, etc. As well as that, when it comes to fatigue, it waits until you hit 60%, and then you get a negative moodle over here. The drowsy moodle sounds innocent enough, however, it's one of the worst you can experience. Damage is decreased by 50% with all your melee weapons, as well as that endurance regeneration is greatly reduced, meaning you're going to have to swing your weapon twice as much, and your endurance is going to run out much quicker because of it. The moment this moodle shows up, you are combat ineffective, and you need to retreat and deal with your fatigue issue. You have already seen how the testing goes, but what we have also included is a car over here. And then what we did was we basically made a backup of this save. Then we would test the sleep, then we would load up the save again, having the exact same scenario, exact same day, exact same everything, so that we could test this as concisely as possible. Then at the same time, we can also go in here and we can edit the player's stats using debug mode, so we could add on all of the potentially positive or negative traits. For example, Night Owl. Night Owl is only available on startup if you choose the security guard profession, which I would heartily not recommend. A quick explainer of what Night Owl does: it causes your fatigue to drop faster while you're asleep. So basically it's going to bottom out at 0 much quicker. The problem is, even though it bottoms you out at 0 much quicker, it doesn't wake you up. So you'll still sleep the exact same amount of time, it just means your fatigue will bottom out at absolute 0, whereas normally you'll have between 7 to 0 fatigue depending on how well you slept. However, in this instance we're sleeping in a car. True, it's got a pillow in it, we'll get back to those in a minute. But the moment we hit sleep right now, you'll watch as the fatigue will plummet rather rapidly. But because we're in an uncomfortable car, we get a negative at the end, as in this is going to go all the way down, and then at the very end, it will pop back up again. And keep going, and we're almost going to hit 0, but because we're sleeping in a poor bed, which is in the car, our fatigue has popped right back up again, even though we were at 0 beforehand. This is to do with bed quality. There are 3 types of bed in the game: good, average, and poor. Good beds, very common, very easy to find. You sleep in them, you get the best sleep. Then you've got your poor beds. These ones are also relatively common as well, unfortunately. But sleeping bags are classified as poor, and so are cars. They actually give you a -30 discomfort modifier when you're sleeping, this little thing down here. However, that's a flat number and has no real bearing. We'll go more into that in a minute. So sleeping on a poor bed will mean you'll sleep for longer, and then at the end of your sleep, it will tack on a fatigue penalty because you slept on a poor bed. So it takes you longer to sleep, and at the end of it, you end up with a whole bunch of extra fatigue you didn't want, which means you're going to need to go back to bed sooner. All that out of the way, here's what our data looks like. If you have slept for 6 hours, you have recovered 60 fatigue, and you're left with 5 fatigue in the morning. You recovered an average of 10 fatigue per slept hour. And then you just run that same test 5 times, and it turns out you average about 9.7 fatigue regenerated per hour of slept time, and then at the same time you still ended up between 0 to 7 fatigue left over when you woke up in the morning. And that's good beds. Let's see how they stack up against some other alternatives. Then came pillows. Pillows supposedly allow you to improve your sleep. So if we go to sleep here, it says sleeping comfort good with pillow. There was also rumblings that you could just leave it in your inventory and it would work, but I have not been able to replicate that. And if you're using it in a car, what you want to do is put the pillow on the front seat of the car. So long as the pillow is placed there, as in get into your car, select the driver's side seat, put the pillow in the driver's side seat. Otherwise, you will not see any effect from having it in your inventory. The way you can tell that it's working: go into debug mode, select general debuggers, go into body, and then scroll down until you find discomfort level. If you sleep in a poor bed or a car seat, you will get minus 30 discomfort. Or you can look over here at our little mod that shows discomfort 0 of 0. Then the moment we load this up and tell them to go to sleep, this is now going to jump up to 20 discomfort. Pillows reduce your discomfort by 10 when sleeping in a bed. So you'll notice there that we've got 20 discomfort instead of what should have been 30 because we're successfully using the pillow. This pillow also works with poor and average beds. The main bonus, though, of the pillow is not that it actually increases your sleep or gives you a better sleep or anything along those lines. It reduces the negative effects of sleeping in the bed that sometimes occur where you get a pain in your neck. We received nothing on this particular run, but usually once out of every 5 sleeps, you'll end up with 1 pain in your neck. This gives you enough pain to go above 20, usually about 22-ish, and then it will hang around for about 40 minutes before it's completely gone. This can be minorly annoying if you wake up and your car is surrounded by zombies and you need to fight immediately because pain will decrease your damage and make you more liable to die in those first 40 minutes. Well, actually, it's probably about 20 minutes before the pain will have gone below the 20-point threshold, which is where negatives start to occur. Long story short, though, on good beds, pillows appear to do nothing or come so close to doing nothing that it's not really relevant. If you can get your hands on a pillow, great. If you can't, I wouldn't worry about it. You only really need pillows for bad beds. Speaking of bad beds, or should I say poor beds, here's a sleeping bag poor. Also counts for, think of it as a car, sleeping bag, anything that's rated poor, they all have the exact same negatives attached to them. You'll wake up in the morning with between 19 and 28 fatigue still left over, and your sleep will jump from 6 to 7 hours to 8 to 9 hours. Your average sleep efficiency, as in fatigue regenerated per hour, drops to half at 4.725. That is terrible. Sleeping in cars, pretty horrendous, but if it's your only choice, it works. As well as that, got neck pain one time, it went up as high as 27, and that 27 pain didn't go away completely for 40 minutes. Now, bear in mind, when I say go away completely, I waited until the 1 disappeared and went to a 0. Once you go below 20 pain, what happens is it is no longer negatively affecting your swings. Once you go below 10, you're not even going to notice. Also, 2 nightmares were had once we started sleeping in the sleeping bags. We had no nightmares at all ever while we were sleeping in a good bed. I don't know if good beds reduce nightmare amounts, but I do feel that poor ones tend to, as will be backed up by further testing. And this is sleeping bag poor plus pillow. This reduces your discomfort by 10, as we've covered, but it also seems to increase sleep efficiency at least slightly. However, these numbers here, it's a small enough sample size that could just be a margin of error. So maybe they don't help, but I would definitely try and get your hands on a pillow for your car, because when neck pain occurs with a pillow, it only went up as high as 8 instead of 27 and was gone in 20 minutes instead of 40. So this reduces the negative side effects of neck pain, and at worst, it does nothing to negatively affect how good your sleep is, and at best, it might actually make it a little bit shorter and a little bit better. However, this one also had one nightmare, or sleep terror, whatever you call it. When it came to poor beds, discomfort was the only thing we saw go up on these graphs over here. So I had a theory that potentially wearing discomforting clothing would affect your sleep. So to replicate discomfort, we had our pawn wear a mining helmet for minus 15 discomfort and a catcher's vest for another minus 15, giving them 30 discomfort. And then we got them to sleep in a good bed. The theory being is this should replicate the same sleeping patterns as a poor bed. It did not. You can sleep in your armor, it won't make a difference. You can sleep in stuff that gives you discomfort. Does not appear to affect sleep efficiency. Took us 6 hours as normal. We had 9 fatigue. Actually, that's 2 more than what happened. It's well within margin of error. But yes, discomfort itself on your clothing will not affect your sleep. All that really matters is the quality of the bed itself, it would appear. And a pillow. That testing is what fills in these few lines here on the spreadsheet. Good bed with minus 30 discomfort, and then we have car minus 30 discomfort and car with pillow. Basically, car with pillow and car without pillow worked out the exact same as the sleeping bag with and without the pillow. So I only did a tiny bit of testing before I determined that all that matters is the ranking of the bed. Then we got Night Owl in a good bed. Night Owl is the security guard trait, and you always wake up with 0 fatigue in the bank, ready to go the maximum distance of the day. However, we'll point out you still sleep for 6 hours, and your sleep efficiency only goes up very marginally. This is an awful large point investment for what's effectively, I have a full fatigue bar when I wake up. What would be better and more beneficial to do with this? Set an alarm to wake yourself up an hour or even 2 hours earlier than normal, or an hour and a half earlier. However, I am never going to do that, and I know most people won't either. It effectively bottoms out your sleep before you wake up, but because it doesn't wake you up, you're effectively wasting time. Then you've got Night Owl in a sleeping bag, and this is painful. Normally, the benefit of Night Owl is it reduces the amount of fatigue when you wake up to 0. However, the sleeping bag already adds a bunch of fatigue no matter what. So even though your fatigue will drop to 0, whether you're in a sleeping bag or a car, it will automatically pop back up a random amount between 10 and 22 points, which is nightmarish. It basically, if you're sleeping in a car, Night Owl is not going to help you. There are 2 other traits we have not looked at yet. One is Wakeful and the other is Restless. And you'll notice when I'm hovering over these, it gives you far more information than you're used to seeing. More descriptions for traits mod. It's kind of useful for figuring some of this stuff out, though it is not perfect, it still has a few missing pieces. First off, we will be testing Wakeful, we will also be testing Restless Sleeper, and we will also be testing Night Owl, and combining all of them in a few different ways just to see if there's any way we could do something good with Restless Sleeper. So first up, we got Wakeful in a good bed. Now, a wakeful sleeper in a good bed will take 5 hours to sleep. That's a whole hour shorter than the standard issue one up here. And at the same time, they will always come out with pretty low down on the fatigue scale. This seems to be quite good and pretty good sleep efficiency. And considering it only costs 2 points, that's actually quite a good bargain. It also has a fatigue gain reduction, but we'll cover more on that at the end. Then you've got Wakeful plus Night Owl. So basically the security guard trait plus the Wakeful trait where you don't need to sleep as much. This one is the most efficient sleep you're ever going to get. 5 hours, you wake up with 0 tiredness every single time. However, the points cost is ridiculous, and I would not recommend going with Night Owl ever. Then, just to get a feel for how stupid things can get, we've got Wakeful Night Owl with Restless Sleeper, as in all 3 traits combined. The problem is Restless Sleeper always makes you wake up after about 3 hours-ish. So what happens is you sleep for 3 hours, then you have to stay awake for a bit, and then sleep for another 3 hours. So your first efficiency gain is actually quite nice, but later on it's not quite so good. And remember, all of these are in a good bed. Just don't do it. Even after 2 sleeps, you still end up with 14 fatigue still attached to you. It's 6 points for getting Restless Sleeper, but even combined with Wakeful and Night Owl, it's still very painful to deal with. For funsies, we tried Wakeful Night Owl with Restless Sleeper in a car with a pillow. They still have to sleep twice, of course, and they slept for a total of 7 hours now, spread across 2 different batches, and their sleep efficiency was, of course, absolutely horrendous. It was 12.6 to 5.3, and now it's 7.2 fatigue recovered per hour. This is just really bad. Second to last, we have Wakeful with Restless Sleeper. So we've got rid of the Night Owl trait, and we've just got Wakeful and Restless Sleeper combined. And yeah, it's still not great. That's looking actually pretty terrible, even worse than if you had Night Owl. You're not even coming close to standard issue. And that is where the testing should have ended, but I, like a fool, decided to be thorough. The test here was to figure out how much fatigue is generated, or how long it takes to generate fatigue, and if you're doing actions, does that actually affect how quickly your fatigue goes up? I was under the impression that reducing your endurance or spending your endurance would increase your fatigue rate. Yeah, let's just show the testing methodology. We're starting at 2 hours 40, and then what we do is we crack open the general debugger, then we're going to fast forward it to about 10:40 in the day. We're basically looking to get about 16 hours, but about halfway through the day, at 10:40-ish, what we're going to do is consume our poultry stew. Just take it all right now, scull a lot of it. Done. Then we fast forward time again, and we're going to stop at 18:40, which will be 16 hours after we started. And done. So, at 18:40, we have generated 65 fatigue, which is the default fatigue rate of a character, it seems, during these hours. Then we had to do a second test. We repeated the exact same process using the Wakeful trait. The Wakeful trait reduces your fatigue generation by 30%, and instead of going up to 65, we ended up at 45 fatigue, which works out about right. There's like a 1-point margin of error here, depending on the timings we're doing. That just left one last trait to test. Restless Sleeper. For some reason, we'll explain why, I was under the impression this increased your fatigue gain. Turns out, no, it does not. So I was expecting this to increase our fatigue gain, but would you look at that? Exact same amount of fatigue as default. Okay, we overshot by a bit the last time by 1 point. Like I said, there's a 1-point margin of error. So it turns out Restless Sleeper does not drive up your fatigue faster. Turns out there was a sleepyhead trait in the game that was removed in build 42, and the sleepyhead trait had that minus to fatigue. This new one Restless Sleeper does not have that, and that changes the numbers dramatically. But first, one last test, because I couldn't help myself. Please note that our testing character Matthew here only has 20 kills. This Matthew McCarthy spent 16 hours with shovels saying hi to zombie skulls. 105 kills over the last 16 hours. They've been working hard. They also got bitten a bit on their upper arm. I'm playing with my left hand, okay? It's pretty terrible. But with that bite, we also got sick, we've got pain from it, and we're slowly zombifying, but you will notice our fatigue is still at 65. Effectively the exact same as if we just stood in that bathroom for the last 16 hours. Maybe there's a tiny scooch more, it's between 64 to 65 fatigue, so this is well within the margin of error. During that entire time, our endurance did dip below 80 occasionally, but by and large, our endurance was kept between 80 and 100, disengaged from fights in smart manners, except for the bite, of course. And only once did our endurance go below 80. Supposedly, if your endurance bottoms out, it will triple your fatigue gain. I have no idea what's going on here, but as far as I can tell, running, jogging, not sprinting, I did not sprint, running, jogging, any of that stuff does not appear to increase your fatigue gain. Also, swinging your shovel all day long also does not increase your fatigue gain. Fatigue is purely a product of time, it would appear. These two facts change the numbers drastically on the traits. Alright, I'm really sorry. This got just a little bit out of hand. It's just the whole change to how fatigue generates and how Wakeful makes sure that you spend less fatigue per hour. So what I thought was, well, a default character without Wakeful spends 3.875 fatigue per hour. A Wakeful character only spends 2.625 fatigue per hour. So if you combined Wakeful with Restless Sleeper, even though you end up with less overall fatigue in the bank to spend, since you spend it more slowly, would it actually even out? And the answer is, yeah, actually, kinda. The two of them sort of cancel each other out in a weird way with some side effects. But this whole blue box, this is basically testing a Wakeful Restless Sleeper in a good bed. Their first 3 hours of sleep generates at about 10 fatigue, and their second 3 hours is 4 to 5. All up, though, they average 20.6 fatigue when they wake up in the morning, after 2 sleeps with a half-hour nap in the middle. So you're looking at 6.5 hours sleep, or in between, and they're left with 20.6 fatigue. Then you take that fatigue and you divide it by or you divide the amount of fatigue they've regenerated by 2.625, and it turns out they can run for about 16.9 hours. The amount of sleep they recover from all of this gives them 16.9 hours. If we compare that to just a normal character with no traits in sleeping in a good bed, they will end up with only an average of 4.8 fatigue left when they wake up in the morning, but they'll spend it at 3.875, meaning they've got about 15.5 hours of sleep in the tank, which is less than the 16.9 hours of sleep in the tank down here. However, they sleep for half an hour less. So now this half an hour, you don't actually lose it. You have it in the middle of the night. You have to sleep for 3 hours, then wake up and sleep for another 3 hours. But if you're willing to put up with that, you actually get slightly more fatigue to spend on average because you're spending it slower. And now, then we had to test cars because, well, if you're sleeping in cars, this also seems to mess things up even worse. This was a nightmare. But you basically end up with about 10 hours of sleep regeneration per 2 naps in a car, whereas a good sleeper or a regular sleeper with no changes, they'll actually get 11. So you're better off sleeping in a car if you don't have any traits. If you do have the traits, your car sleep is going to be slightly worse. This is interesting. Early game, I can see Wakeful Restless Sleeper being really good, so long as you're avoiding sleeping in your car. As well as that, every time you pound some caffeine, you get 30% more out of it. The caffeine comes up in it next, but let's just remember that you generate fatigue slower with the Wakeful trait. And if you just have Wakeful on its own, you're going to do really good, and it's actually going to be an excellent trait. I would heavily recommend it. However, Wakeful and Restless Sleeper do cancel each other out, and the advantage is caffeine will be even more powerful. As well as that, you can do a weird thing mid-game when you're in your base, would be you can regenerate 30 fatigue for the first 3 hours. Because when you're sleeping, the first 3 hours of sleep are the most profitable, getting you between 9 to 10 sleep per hour rested. That's actually just as efficient as regular sleepers, but you only get 3 hours of it, meaning if you just regenerate 30 fatigue in the first 3 hours of sleep, that's worth 11.4 hours of wakefulness, and then you can just go back to sleep for another 3 hours and just repeat. So your schedule, okay, you'd have to deal with the darkness at night, but if you wanted to, you could combine it with Cat's Eyes or something along those lines. But yes, it turns out Wakeful and Restless Sleeper combined is actually not quite free points, but close enough to free points it might be worthwhile for a lot of people. Was not expecting that at all. Also, it turns out Wakeful, with its 30% reduction in fatigue generation, really means you can stretch your sleep quite a bit. If you just get that without the negative of restless sleeper, you could go really far. We've eaten our veggies, we understand how sleep works with all the traits, so now, let's just ignore them all and eat a tea bag raw. Our fatigue is at 67, and now watch as it plummets to about 55, I want to say. Actually, 53. Yes, eating a tea bag, just raw dogging it, will get rid of 15 fatigue. It will also increase your thirst by 10. Now, if you don't like the idea of just eating a tea bag that way, what you could do is just add some, well, water to it. So grab yourself a teacup, create beverage, and put in a tea bag. And done. Now, this is uncooked. Currently, it gives you -5 hunger, but you can cook it in an oven if you really want. But we're just going to be savages here and consume it. And done. That will bring us up down another 15 points. Finished. So, tea bags. If you find them, grab them. That means you can basically knock off 15 points of fatigue. And as I pointed out, once you go to 60 points of fatigue, that's where you're getting to the point of it's time to go to bed. And it's normally you'll burn through about 60 points of fatigue in a day. So if you can get your hands on about 4 tea bags, it's almost a day's worth of fatigue. However, tea may sound good, but it pales in comparison to the power of coffee. There are 2 wrong ways and 1 right way to consume coffee. The first wrong way is just to gobble down a whole jar. That's right, just crack the top off that jar and scull the lot down. This will increase your thirst by a substantial quantity. However, our fatigue will go from 67 to 17. That is a drop of 50 fatigue for just 1 chug. Pretty good. The second wrong way to consume it is to grab an empty teacup or an empty mug. Go to the sink, fill them up, and put a whole bunch of water in them. Find teacups with water in them, create beverage, and select coffee. You can do this with tea as well, but it will give you the exact same amount of energy recovery. Coffee, however, seems to be a bit odd. This is 1/5 of a coffee jar. You can make 5 coffees with each jar. If we take this one and we drink it all, we should, in theory, recover 10 fatigue. Eating a jar of coffee reduces it by 50. Eating a 5th should reduce it by 10, but it doesn't. Instead, it reduces it by only 8. So this is an inefficient method of consuming coffee. Do not do it. Finally, we have the ultimate way to consume coffee. Find yourself a coffee machine. You can actually find these in cases as well. Go down to coffee machine. You see you get 5 uses per jar. It takes 0.1 liters of water. You will need power. And we are going to craft 3 of these. Thank you very much. It is quick. It is efficient. It provides a hot, steamy beverage. And then what it is, well, you should make sure you have the water on you in a water bottle or in the cups themselves. It doesn't matter, it can work with either. Then we are going to drink one of the coffees. This will reduce our fatigue by a grand total of 25. Yes, that is right. It has reduced your fatigue by 25. Now, considering there is 5 coffees that you can make per mug, and so long as you've got a coffee machine and the power to run it, that means 1 jar of coffee can provide you with 125 fatigue reduction. Which, yeah, that's absolutely batty insane. And that means you can get by at about 2.5 coffees a day, and you just don't have to sleep. Meaning 1 jar is equivalent to about 2 days. Oh, also it increases your hunger meter, so kind of handy that way. It doesn't give you any calories though. So I suppose to sum up what we have learned here. 1, tea is okay. The 15 from tea, not the end of the world. Grab the tea bags as you find them. The moment you find yourself a coffee machine and you have some coffee, basically stick 2 coffees in your inventory would be my assessment. They don't need to be hot when you drink them. You can keep them on you for days if you need be. Getting into a fight, your fatigue dips into the 60 mark, disengage, chug a coffee, get right back in there. In fact, coffee is relatively rare, so you're only going to be, my advice would be use it a lot in the early game. And if you're starting in, say, somewhere like Rosewood, I know this place is very new player friendly, but just up from the Court of Justice, well, around the corner from the fire station, up from the police station, up from the Court of Justice, you've got McFudgington's. This McFudgington's has a very high percentage chance of containing coffee in one of... Yep, there we go. We got 3 coffees right there. So that's about 6 days worth of caffeine, meaning you don't gotta sleep for the first 6 days of the game. Kinda crazy. Oh, and 2 tea bags as well, and some empty teacups. And don't forget to check the front. No, just donuts and mugs. However, the second best place to find it is canteens, or Basically, these office places in here that are attached to businesses, they also have a high probability of spawning coffee. None this time around. The last two items that look to affect fatigue are chocolate-covered coffee beans. I have never seen these in the wild. They're only available to spawn in the debug menu. Maybe they exist out there, but I've never seen it. Takes you from 54 down to 49. Okay, so 6 points. Pretty weak sauce. Caffeine pills do exist in the wild, but they are even rarer than finding a jar of coffee and less effective. There's 5 pills per bottle, and they reduce your fatigue by a grand total of 4. So, yeah, 5 by 4 is 20. So let's just chug them all. And 5, and that's the bottom of the bottle. Basically, a coffee jar is just more efficient in every way, shape, or form, so the rarity of caffeine pills is not an issue. You would much prefer to find a jar of coffee. So, let's summarize all of this for people who don't be bothered watching all the testing. Night Owl comes with security guard. Absolutely useless unless you're willing to set an alarm clock on your watch or bring an alarm clock with you to wake you up. Otherwise, you're just going to sleep the same amount of time and have slightly more fatigue available to you the next day. Just slightly more. Wakeful, incredibly useful, and for 2 points, an absolute bargain basement steal. The big bonus is not the actual sleep duration reduction. This will reduce your sleep from 6 hours to about 5, assuming you're going to bed about a reasonable hour. It's more the 30% tiredness loss rate while awake, the minus 30%. Your tiredness increases slower while you're awake, which means in the average day, you're going to generate 30% less tiredness, meaning either you can A, you can go to bed later, or B, go to bed at the same time, but just sleep for less, even less, because you won't have generated as much tiredness during your waking life. Minus 2 points, that is an amazing deal. Restless Sleeper comes across really interesting. In my opinion, you would definitely have to bundle it with Wakeful. Without Wakeful, I think this would be just too uncomfortable. I mean, everything's livable within this game. You could take all negatives and still win. It's just a case of Restless Sleeper seems like a lot of annoyance. Combining it with Wakeful, though, pretty much gets rid of most of them. The only downside is you have to, sleep twice and spend half an hour in the middle of the night, maybe reading a magazine or something like that. Also, early game, the bonuses from caffeine would be 30% greater, giving you that little bit of extra time to eke out a living at the start of the game. I think, yeah, combining the two of these is quite good and it gives you 4 extra points. It could be combined with Cat's Eyes, so you could keep fighting during the night, though I would definitely not recommend that anyway. Anyway, I just wanted to know if Restless Sleeper and Wakeful cancel each other out. It turns out they do, and I also know that a bunch about fatigue now. I hope this was at least mildly informative for you, and good luck. A little bit of a channel update to close out. I know I haven't been on much recently. It's just I actually sprained the muscles in my wrist. Turns out, yeah, it was sore for a while. Then I played Planet Crafters, and then I played Project Zomboid, and it turns out a lot of clicking in there. Yeah, so made it worse. Doc says, yeah, no, I don't have carpal tunnel or anything, but, I got to take it easy with it and not use it as much. And, yes, I'm doing tutorials because you can do that stuff with your left hand. Though trying to play Project Zomboid with your left hand is really awkward. Also, yeah, trying to use the WASD keys with my right hand, I don't think that's helping. So I'm just going to have to not use my right hand for anything for a while, which is going to make things interesting. I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of tutorials coming up that I can make one-handed, which sounds wrong now that I say it. But you know what I mean. It's just, it's going to be tutorials for a while now until my hand gets better. Apologies.